Story 1. I think about that motel every so often, not because it was nice, believe me, it wasn't, but because of what happened there. Even now, years later, I still can't explain it, and the more I replay it in my head, the creepier it gets. It was right after a brutal work week. I just finished managing this massive 5-day event that left me completely wrecked, about 10 hours of sleep total over the whole week. By the time it wrapped up, I could barely keep my eyes open. I had a flight out of the country early the next morning, but instead of staying somewhere familiar, I decided to save a little cash and book this cheap motel. Big mistake. When I got there, I could tell right away that the place wasn't ideal. The carpet squished under my shoes, the air smelled faintly damp, and the blankets on the bed felt like they hadn't fully dried from a wash, if they'd even been washed. I was too exhausted to care, though. I dropped my bag, kicked off my shoes, and collapsed onto the bed. The mattress creaked loudly, but it didn't matter. I was out cold by 8 p.m. Sometime later, I was jolted awake by the sound of the room phone ringing. You know that harsh, old-school motel phone ring? It felt like it was drilling right into my skull. For a second, I couldn't even remember where I was. Groggily, I picked up the receiver. "Hello," I croaked. There was a pause. Then a man's voice, calm but insistent. "This is the front desk. We've received a noise complaint from your room." That woke me up a little. "What? That's impossible," I said, sitting up. "I've been sleeping since I got here." "Are you sure?" the man asked. "Maybe it's someone else in your room." I frowned. "No, I'm alone," I replied, irritated now. "There's no one else here." Another pause. Then he asked again, "Are you sure you're by yourself? No one else could be making noise?" "Yes, I'm sure," I snapped. "I'm alone. I've been sleeping. There's no noise coming from this room." "All right," he said, his tone still calm, almost too calm. "Have a good night." Click. He hung up, and I sat there for a moment, confused and annoyed. Why would the front desk call me, of all people? The motel wasn't exactly packed. There were maybe 3 cars in the lot when I checked in, and there definitely hadn't been any noise. The place was eerily quiet, the kind of quiet where you could hear the hum of the fridge across the room. Too tired to think about it, I flopped back down and fell asleep almost immediately. The next morning, it hit me. That phone call was weird, really weird. Why would the front desk accuse me of making noise when I'd been dead asleep? And why did they ask so many times if I was alone? Once, maybe, would make sense. But multiple times? It didn't sit right. I started replaying the interaction in my head. Something about the man's tone, calm but almost too deliberate, gave me chills. It wasn't like he was genuinely checking for a noise complaint. It felt more like he was trying to confirm something. The rest of the morning passed in a blur. I checked out quickly, not wanting to linger in that place any longer than I had to. As I was loading my bag into the car, I glanced up at my room window, half expecting to see someone staring back at me. But it was just an empty window, pale curtains fluttering slightly. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't leaving alone, that somehow part of that motel was coming with me. Here's the part that freaks me out the most. The more I've thought about it since, the more certain I am that something wasn't right that night. What if the call wasn't from the front desk? What if someone else in the motel, another guest, or worse, someone who wasn't supposed to be there, was trying to find out if I was alone? What if they had a key? I don't like to dwell on those what ifs, but sometimes they creep into my head, especially when I'm traveling solo. I double-check every lock now, every deadbolt, every chain, and I'll never stay at a rundown motel again, no matter how tired I am. Some money saved just isn't worth it. Story 2. You never think your job is going to give you chills, especially when you're just cleaning rooms. But there was one hotel where I worked a couple of summers back, and there was one room, just one, at the end of the hallway that still makes the hairs on my arms stand up every time I remember it. It was my first day on the job, and everything seemed normal enough. The hotel wasn't fancy, just a mid-tier place a few miles outside of Pittsburgh. Guests would stay for business trips, conferences, the occasional road trip pit stop. Nothing weird, nothing out of the ordinary. At least that's how it was when I was training to clean the rooms with another housekeeper named Maria. When we got to the last room in the hall, she stopped dead in her tracks. Just a heads up, she said, lowering her voice and giving me a look. Things happen in this room. What do you mean, things? I asked, laughing nervously. She didn't laugh back. You'll see, Maria said. Don't freak out, but it's always the same stuff. The faucet will start running, or the TV will turn on, usually while your back is turned. It's just a thing with this room. Don't worry, it's not dangerous. Whatever it is just wants to be here with you. I thought she was joking, or maybe trying to freak me out. But Maria wasn't the type to make jokes like that. She was serious, and her words stayed with me as I started working the room. I remember it clearly. The room number was 237, the very last one on the third floor. It looked like any other room at first glance. Beige walls, dark carpet, a stiff-looking chair by the window. Nothing unusual. But as I began stripping the bed and cleaning the surfaces, the atmosphere started to feel odd, heavy almost. The first thing happened about 10 minutes in. I was scrubbing the bathtub, crouched down with my back to the sink when I heard it. A faint but steady sound of water gurgling down the drain. I turned around, and sure enough, the faucet was running. Not full blast, but enough to make a noticeable noise. The knob had been turned maybe halfway, and I swear it hadn't been on when I started. Okay, I muttered to myself, turning it off. My hands were shaking a little as I wiped the sink dry and tried not to think about what Maria had said. I told myself I must have bumped the knob earlier, even though I was nowhere near it. Accidents happen, right? But then, maybe 20 minutes later, I was making the bed. I had the sheets rustling in my hands, making noise as I tucked the edges in. That's when I heard the faint sound of muffled voices. I froze, my hands still gripping the sheets, and turned my head toward the corner where the TV sat. The screen was on, glowing softly, showing some random news channel. The remote was still sitting untouched on the nightstand. I stood there staring at the TV, my chest tightening. The voices continued, just soft chatter between the anchors. But I hadn't touched that remote. I was certain of it. I hadn't even finished cleaning the side table. The words Maria said on my first day came flooding back to me. They just want to be there with you, she had said. And the worst part? I felt it. Whatever part of the room I wasn't looking at, whatever corner I turned my back to, it felt like someone was there, standing just out of sight, not hostile but present, watching. I finished the room in record time and practically ran out into the hallway. Maria was waiting there, leaning against her cart. She saw my face and nodded knowingly. TV or faucet, she asked. Both, I said quietly. She didn't look surprised. For the rest of that summer, I dreaded room 237. Most days I tried to swap shifts or work a different floor just to avoid it. But inevitably, I'd end up back at the end of the hallway, steeling myself for whatever was going to happen. The same two things, always. Faucet turns on, TV switches itself on. Once the faucet turned on, while the TV was running, and I nearly dropped the trash bag I was carrying. What scared me the most wasn't just that it happened, it was the consistency. It wasn't random, it was deliberate, like whatever was in that room was saying, I'm still here. I never saw anything physically move. No doors creaked open, no footsteps echoed behind me. But every time my back was turned, I could feel it, the presence. Not threatening, not menacing, but definitely there. Like someone who wanted to keep you company, but didn't want you to turn around and actually see them. I asked Maria once if she'd ever tried talking to it. She shrugged like it was the most normal question in the world. Once or twice, she said, but I don't think it's interested in talking. It's just there. After that summer, I quit the job and moved on to something else. I've stayed in dozens of hotels since then, cleaned plenty of other rooms, but nothing has ever felt like room 237. Sometimes I wonder what happened there, why that room was different, why it always gave off that feeling. I don't know if it was a guest who passed away, or maybe just residual energy from years of people coming and going. Story 3. The first time I ever experienced something I couldn't explain, I was staying in a motel with my family. It was the kind of place you stop at during a long road trip. Basic, cheap, nothing special. Just a small room with 2 beds, a TV, and a counter by the bathroom sink. Looking back, there wasn't anything creepy about it during the day, but at night, that room became something else entirely. I was a teenager at the time, traveling with my dad and my younger sister. My dad took one bed, and my sister and I shared the other. By the time we checked in, it was already dark, and we were all wiped from being on the road for hours. After settling in, we turned the lights off, and I laid there trying to relax. My sister had curled up next to me and fallen asleep almost immediately, and I could hear my dad's soft snoring from across the room. But me, I was wide awake. I don't know if it was the unfamiliar bed, the noises outside, or just that restless energy you sometimes get when you're overtired. Either way, I couldn't drift off. Instead, I just lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling and waiting for sleep to take over. That's when I heard it. It started as a soft noise just behind me, near the counter by the bathroom. At first, it sounded like someone lightly tapping or nudging something, a brush or a bottle maybe. My first thought was that it was my sister, but I could feel her next to me, breathing deeply in her sleep. Then I glanced at my dad. He was out cold, his back turned toward me. Neither of them was moving. I held my breath, listening harder. The faint noises continued for a moment, little clicks and creaks, like someone shifting their weight on the floorboards. My stomach tightened as it dawned on me. It wasn't either of them. That's when I heard the footsteps, slow, deliberate steps, moving from the counter toward the middle of the room. They were soft, but in the stillness of the night, they might as well have been thunder. My heart started racing. I didn't dare turn around. All I could do was lay there, frozen, trying to make sense of what I was hearing. My first thought was that someone had somehow snuck into our room and was now trying to slip out unnoticed. The idea terrified me, but at the same time I clung to it because at least it was something real, something I could explain. The footsteps kept coming, one after another, slow and deliberate. They weren't hurried, like someone in a panic. No, they were calm, confident, almost too casual, like whoever, or whatever, it was had no reason to rush. They stopped, right next to my side of the bed. I couldn't see anything. My head was mostly buried under the comforter, and the only thing in my line of sight was my dad's outline in the other bed. I could feel my sister's arm still pressed against mine, unmoving, so I knew she was still fast asleep. That meant whatever was standing there, inches from me, wasn't her. The air felt heavier, charged, like something was hovering over me. I stayed completely still, my breathing slow and shallow, hoping whoever it was wouldn't notice I was awake. But then I got the distinct sensation, like an instinct almost, that they were looking at me, turning their head, staring right at me through the dark. I can't explain it, but it was as if I could feel their gaze, like a heat radiating toward me. My neck and ears felt hot, burning under the pressure of it. My fingers gripped the edges of the blanket so tightly they hurt, but I didn't move. I was too scared. Every muscle in my body screamed at me to do something. Scream, run, anything. But all I could do was wait. And then, nothing. The air shifted and the feeling was gone. No sound, no movement, just silence, like whatever had been there had dissolved into the darkness. My heart was hammering in my chest as I threw the covers off and scrambled for the light switch. The room flooded with light, revealing nothing. No one. Just the same cramped motel room as before. My dad bolted upright, squinting at me in confusion. "What's going on?" he grumbled, clearly irritated. My sister groaned, rubbing her eyes. I thought I heard something," I stammered. My voice sounded small, shaky, like footsteps, someone in the room. My dad frowned, scanning the room quickly before flopping back onto his pillow. "It's probably just the floor creaking. Go back to sleep." But I couldn't. I spent the rest of the night sitting up, staring at the spot where the footsteps had stopped, half expecting to see something materialize. I didn't sleep at all, and when the sun finally came up, I was the first one out of that room. Story 4. Holiday Inns are usually pretty unremarkable places. Reliable, comfortable, a safe spot to crash when you're traveling. That's what we thought when we booked one in Houston. It was close to the zoo and a few hospitals, and there was a Pizza Hut in the parking lot, which seemed like an added bonus at the time. It felt like an easy choice, but what happened during that stay still sticks with me, and I don't think I'll ever see another Holiday Inn the same way again. It was me, my sister, and our parents. We were road tripping through Texas, stopping at spots along the way to sightsee. That night, our parents took the bedroom, while my sister and I ended up sharing the pull-out couch in the living room area. The setup was fine, at least it seemed fine at first. I was dozing off, my head buried in the stiff pillows of the pull-out couch. It was late, and I was in that half-asleep state where the world starts to blur and you stop paying attention to the little sounds around you. I remember hearing what sounded like the door opening, a soft click and a faint creak. But I was so close to falling asleep that it barely registered. My brain dismissed it as nothing. That is, until my sister sat bolt upright and shouted, "Someone just came in!" she said, her voice high and panicked. I jolted awake, my heart pounding. Before I could say anything, my parents rushed into the room, flicking the lights on and scanning the space. The pull-out couch, the TV stand, the little hallway that led to the bathroom. It was all empty. Nobody there. The door, which my dad had locked and chained when we got there, was still secure. It hadn't been touched, not even the chain. "See? No one's here," my dad said, his voice firm but tired. He shook his head and ran a hand over his face. "You must have dreamed it." "No, I didn't," my sister insisted. She was wide-eyed, sitting up straight and gripping the edge of the blanket. "I saw someone. The door opened all the way, and the light from the hallway came in. Someone walked in, shut the door, and then disappeared." She sounded so sure, so serious, but my parents weren't convinced. They checked the locks again, muttered something about too much road trip exhaustion, and went back to bed, leaving the pull-out couch light on this time. My sister wasn't going back to sleep anytime soon, though, and honestly, neither was I. We were still whispering about it when the next thing happened. It started as faint footsteps, soft shuffling sounds that seemed to move across the carpet. At first I thought I was imagining it, but my sister grabbed my arm, her eyes wide, and whispered, "Do you hear that?" I nodded, my pulse racing as the footsteps moved closer. They weren't loud, just gentle padding, like someone walking barefoot. But they were deliberate, going from the TV stand to the couch, and then into the little hallway that led to our parents' room. Their room didn't have a door, just an open frame. My sister and I stayed frozen on the pull-out couch, following the sounds with our eyes and whispering back and forth. "It's not scary," my sister said at one point. "It's just weird." She was right. Somehow it didn't feel sinister, but it was definitely unnerving. The footsteps circled back, heading toward the bathroom. And then, the bathroom door opened. Not creaked, not swung slightly ajar. It heaved open, like someone had shoved it with force. If you've ever been in a Holiday Inn, you know those bathroom doors are heavy. My mom struggled with that same door earlier when she tried to air the bathroom out after a shower. But now it moved effortlessly, with no one standing there to push it. My sister and I sat perfectly still, watching as the faucet turned on, ran for maybe 3 seconds, and then shut off again. The shuffling resumed, quieter now, just a few faint movements near the bathroom. And then, nothing. We didn't hear another sound the rest of the night. The next morning, we told our parents what happened. My dad didn't believe us at first, chalking it up to our imaginations. But my mom frowned and said, "That door? There's no way it just opened on its own." That was all she said about it. The rest of the trip passed without incident, but every night after that, I kept one ear open, listening for anything unusual. Looking back, I'm still not sure what we experienced. Maybe it was just the creaks and quirks of an older Holiday Inn, or maybe it was something more. All I know is it wasn't scary, at least not in the jump-out-of-your-skin way, but it was definitely enough to leave me wondering. And that quiet shuffling, those heavy doors moving on their own, yeah, I'm not forgetting that anytime soon. Story 5. I've traveled for work a lot. Hotels, airports, conferences, the usual grind. I'd like to think of myself as someone who can sleep just about anywhere. Dodgy motels or five-star hotels, it doesn't matter. But there's one night that still sticks with me. It wasn't because the place was bad. In fact, the hotel was brand new, clean, and far above average. Maybe that's what makes the whole thing so unsettling. It was in Penang, Malaysia, during one of my business trips. Everything about the night started normal, until it didn't. When I checked in, I noticed that my room was at the very end of the hallway. Now, in certain local beliefs, that's not an ideal spot. People say rooms at the end of hallways hold stagnant energy, or worse, they attract things. I've stayed in plenty of corner rooms before, and nothing weird ever happened, so I didn't pay much attention to it. Still, as a courtesy to, well, whatever might be out there, I knocked on the door before entering and said, "Pardon me. It's just something I picked up from other travelers. Better safe than sorry, right?" The room felt fine. Nothing eerie, no odd smells or cold spots, and the view from the 15th floor was actually pretty nice. Everything about it screamed normal. I went through my usual routine, set my bag down, freshened up a bit, answered some emails. By the time 8 p.m. rolled around, I was ready to pass out. Exhaustion hit me like a brick wall. I barely had enough energy to kick off my shoes before collapsing onto the bed. Now, I don't usually remember my dreams, but that night, something was different. I woke up suddenly around 4 a.m., heart pounding, my body drenched in sweat. And the thing is, I was coming out of this hyper-realistic nightmare. In the dream, I was lying on my left side, facing the window, just like I had been when I went to sleep. I heard it first, the sound of a door sliding open. It was clear as day, that metallic hiss and soft click of a balcony door. Except, there was no balcony. There was no door on the window side of the room. This was the 15th floor. The rational part of my brain whispered, "It's just a dream. It's fine. Go back to sleep." But in the dream, I knew something had entered. I didn't see it, not right away, but I could feel it. Whatever it was moved slowly, deliberately, circling around the bed behind me. My whole body tensed. I felt the weight of its presence, like the air in the room had changed, pressing down on me. And then it happened. I felt hands, cold, strong hands gripping my neck from behind. They squeezed, tighter and tighter, until I could barely breathe. I thrashed, trying to fight back, but my body felt heavy, like I was trapped between sleep and waking. Somehow, through sheer willpower or adrenaline, I managed to push against those invisible hands. I thought angrily, "Wake up! Wake up!" I shot upright in bed, gasping for air. The room was silent. Nothing moved. My eyes darted to the window, then around the dimly lit space, searching for anything out of place. The faint glow from the building opposite cast pale light across the furniture. Everything looked normal, but my skin crawled like I wasn't alone. The attack had come from behind me. I knew it was just a dream, or at least, that's what I kept telling myself. But I couldn't bring myself to turn around. Every instinct screamed at me not to. My mind was on a loop. Don't turn around. Don't turn around. I stayed there for what felt like forever, frozen, staring straight ahead. My breath was shallow, my forehead slick with sweat. Finally, I forced myself to move. Slowly, painfully, I shifted my weight and laid back, keeping my gaze locked on the ceiling. And that's when it happened. Just as I started to relax, the air conditioning unit whirred to life with a sudden mechanical groan. I nearly jumped out of my skin. I sat up again, my heart pounding like a drum. The rational side of my brain tried to explain it away. "It's just the AC. It's fine. You're fine." But there was no calming down at that point. Any chance of falling back asleep was gone. I reached over, flicked on the lights, and grabbed my phone. For the next hour, I sat there scrolling aimlessly, trying to shake the lingering fear. I kept glancing at the corners of the room, expecting to see something. Eventually, the exhaustion took over again, and I drifted off, the lights still blazing. When I woke up around 6:30, the sun was creeping through the curtains. The room looked harmless in daylight, the kind of place you'd forget the moment you checked out. But I couldn't forget. Not the dream, not the choking sensation, and definitely not the overwhelming feeling that someone, or something had been in that room with me. I didn't bother with breakfast. I packed my bag, checked out, and got the hell out of there. Story 6. I didn't think much of it when we booked the Driskill in Austin. My boyfriend had found a deal online, and it looked like a classic, charming hotel, perfect for a weekend getaway. Neither of us knew anything about its reputation until we got there. Walking through the lobby, we overheard another guest whispering about how it's one of the most haunted hotels in Texas. Ghost hunters flock to it, apparently. My boyfriend thought it was cool. Me? Not so much. I laughed it off, but let's just say it stuck in the back of my mind. The room itself was gorgeous. High ceilings, plush bedding, and antique-looking furniture that added a little character. It felt upscale and historic, like stepping into a time capsule. Nothing creepy about it at first glance. Our stay was uneventful, to be honest. No flickering lights, no odd noises, no ghostly figures at the foot of the bed. It wasn't until the morning we checked out that things got weird. We were standing by the door, making sure we hadn't forgotten anything. My boyfriend had his arms full of luggage, and I was digging through my purse for my phone charger. I remember glancing down the long hallway outside our room. It was empty, lined with soft yellow lighting that gave it a cozy, almost old-world feel. Just as I turned back toward him, the lights flickered. Not just a little flicker, like when a bulb is about to go out. All of them, every single light in the hallway, blinked out completely, plunging it into pitch black for half a second before buzzing back to life. The hum of the bulbs was the only sound, but it felt unnaturally loud in the silence. "What was that?" I asked, my voice sharper than I meant. My boyfriend shrugged, more amused than anything. "Old wiring, maybe?" "It's an old hotel." I rolled my eyes and grabbed my suitcase. I was already ready to leave and didn't want to spend another second thinking about it. But just as we were about to walk out the door, he stopped suddenly. "Wait," he said, frowning. "I think I left my laptop bag in the room." My first instinct was to tell him to forget about it. The thought of stepping back inside after the lights had flickered felt wrong, but I didn't want to seem like I was overreacting. I sighed. "All right, let's grab it and go." We both turned back toward the room, and the second we crossed the threshold, I felt it. The air was different, heavier, colder. I told myself it was just the contrast between the cool room and the warm hallway air. But deep down, something felt off. The bag was sitting on the desk by the window, exactly where he'd left it. My boyfriend grabbed it and turned toward the door. "Got it," he said, but his voice sounded tight, like he felt it too. That weird pressure in the air. As we stepped back out into the hallway, something caught my eye. A movement, just a flicker at the very end of the corridor, barely within my line of sight. I stopped in my tracks, squinting. "Did you see that?" I asked. "See what?" he replied, turning to look. "There, at the end of the hall," I said, pointing. But whatever I thought I'd seen was gone. Just an empty hallway again, stretching off into the distance. The lights buzzed faintly overhead, casting long shadows on the carpet. "You're imagining things," my boyfriend said, though his tone wasn't as confident as usual. He tugged my hand gently. "Come on, let's go." I hesitated, my heart pounding in my chest. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, but I followed him anyway. The flicker of movement, the pressure in the air. I tried to tell myself it was all in my head. We took the elevator down to the lobby, my stomach twisting with unease. The ride felt longer than it should have, each floor ticking by at a snail's pace. I kept glancing at my reflection in the mirrored walls, half expecting to see something, or someone, standing behind me. Nothing. When we finally reached the ground floor, the bright, bustling lobby felt like a relief. Guests were checking out, bellhops were rushing around, and the faint aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the air. I exhaled, finally starting to relax. Maybe I really had been imagining things. As we walked toward the front desk to check out, my boyfriend laughed. "See? Nothing haunted here. You're just jumpy." I gave him a weak smile, not wanting to admit that I still felt on edge. The flickering lights, the movement in the hallway. It had to be nothing. It had to be. We handed over the key cards, said our goodbyes to the receptionist, and stepped out onto the busy Austin street. The air was warm, The sun was shining, and everything felt normal again. It wasn't until we were halfway to the car that my boyfriend stopped dead in his tracks. "What now?" I asked, exasperated. His face turned sheepish. I think I left my headphones in the nightstand." I stared at him, incredulous. "You've got to be kidding me." He shrugged helplessly. "I swear I packed everything, but I don't remember grabbing them." I groaned, the idea of going back into the hotel making my skin crawl. But I wasn't about to let him go back alone. "Fine, let's make it quick." The moment we stepped back inside, I felt it again. That same heavy, oppressive air. The lobby didn't feel as bright this time, the shadows from the grand chandeliers seeming darker somehow. My stomach churned as we took the elevator back up to the 6th floor. When the doors opened, the hallway stretched before us, eerily silent. The lights still buzzed faintly overhead, but they felt dimmer now, like they were struggling to stay on. I clutched my boyfriend's arm, trying to steady my breathing as we walked back toward the room. He unlocked the door and we stepped inside. The air inside the room felt colder than before, though the thermostat hadn't been touched. My boyfriend grabbed his headphones from the nightstand, holding them up triumphantly. "Got 'em," he said. But as we turned to leave, the lights in the room flickered, just like the ones in the hallway earlier. I froze, my grip tightening on his arm. The hair on the back of my neck stood on end. "Let's go," I whispered, my voice barely audible. We didn't bother turning off the lights or checking the room again. We bolted, leaving the key on the desk and not looking back. By the time we got to the car, my heart was racing so fast I thought it might burst. Even now, I can't explain what happened at the Driskill that morning. Maybe it was all a coincidence. The flickering lights, the strange air, the flicker of movement at the end of the hallway. Or maybe it wasn't. All I know is, I don't plan on finding out. Story 7, I didn't go to the Lizzie Borden bed and breakfast expecting anything paranormal. Honestly, I didn't even know it was supposed to be haunted until we got there. My friend and I had booked it on a whim during a road trip through Massachusetts. It wasn't until we checked in and got the grand tour that I realized just how infamous the place was. Apparently, it's a big deal for ghost hunters and thrill seekers. Me? I was just there for the novelty of staying in a historic house. Or so I thought. The house itself was unsettling in that old, creaky way. Every floorboard groaned underfoot, and the air felt heavy, like the walls were holding on to something. The tour guide was enthusiastic, walking us through each room and recounting the gruesome details of the murders. When we got to the parlor, she pointed out the exact spot where Lizzie Borden's father had been found, his skull caved in by an axe. The couch was long gone, but the room still felt wrong, like it was frozen in time, waiting for something to happen. After the tour, the guide encouraged us to explore the house on our own. "Take pictures, ask questions, see if you can feel anything," she said with a grin. My friend and I decided to hang out in the parlor. It seemed like the most interesting spot, and we weren't ready to head to bed just yet. A few other guests joined us, and we ended up sitting on the floor in a loose circle, chatting and asking the guide more questions. The conversation was light at first, mostly jokes about ghost stories and whether or not we believed in spirits. I didn't, not really, but as we sat there, the atmosphere started to shift. The room felt colder, and the shadows in the corners seemed to stretch just a little farther than they should. I told myself it was just my imagination, that I was letting the stories get to me. But then the door to the dining room started shaking. It wasn't subtle. The door rattled violently, the knob twisting like someone was trying to force it open. We all froze, staring at it. My first thought was that it had to be a draft, or maybe one of the other guests messing with us. But the dining room was empty. We'd just come from there, and no one had gone in after us. "What the hell?" my friend whispered, her voice barely audible. One of the other guests, a guy sitting across from me, leaned forward and said, "I wonder if Mr. Borden is pissed we're lounging around his death site." The second the words left his mouth, the door stopped. Just like that. No more rattling, no more twisting knob. It was dead silent, the kind of silence that makes your ears ring. We all looked at each other, wide-eyed, trying to process what had just happened. "Did that really just happen?" someone finally asked. No one answered. We were all too freaked out to say anything. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. I wanted to laugh it off, to say it was just a coincidence, but the timing was too perfect. It was like whatever, or whoever, was on the other side of that door had heard us and decided to make a point. We didn't stick around much longer after that. The group dispersed pretty quickly, everyone retreating to their rooms. My friend and I didn't say much as we climbed the stairs to our shared room. The house was eerily quiet, every creak of the floorboards amplified in the stillness. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, like something was following us up the stairs. When we got to our room, I locked the door behind us and double-checked it, just to be safe. My friend flopped onto the bed, pulling the covers up to her chin. "That was weird," she said, her voice shaky. "Yeah," I replied, not really knowing what else to say. I didn't want to admit how freaked out I was. Instead, I grabbed my bag and rummaged through it until I found the Xanax I'd brought for the trip. I popped one and climbed into bed, hoping it would knock me out before my imagination could run wild. The night passed without incident, but I didn't sleep well. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that door shaking, heard the rattle of the knob. I kept expecting to wake up and see someone, or something, standing at the foot of the bed. When morning finally came, I was relieved to pack up and leave. Looking back, I still don't know what to make of that night. I'm not sure if I believe in ghosts, but I do know that something happened in that parlor, something I can't explain. And honestly, I'm okay with not knowing. Some things are better left a mystery. Story 8. The room was almost too good to be true. I checked into the hotel late on a Monday evening after the first day of a 2-week training course. It had been a long day, one of those where you're mentally drained but physically restless, so when the receptionist handed me the key and mentioned I'd been upgraded to a premium room, I was pleasantly surprised. As a regular business traveler, I was used to cramped rooms with barely enough space to maneuver around the bed. So walking into that room felt like a luxury. It was the largest hotel room I'd ever stayed in. The bed was a massive super king with crisp white sheets, the kind that almost looked too perfect to touch. There was a seating area with a small sofa and coffee table, a desk by the window, and an enormous bathroom with a soaking tub that practically begged me to relax. For once, I thought, I'd lucked out. I wasted no time settling in. After a long soak in the tub, I ordered room service, a simple pasta dish, and stretched out on the bed with the TV on. Everything felt calm, comfortable. It was the kind of night you don't really think twice about, where nothing extraordinary happens. But something shifted later that evening. I can't pinpoint exactly when, but it started after I switched the TV from a show to one of the radio channels, letting the soft hum of music fill the room as I got ready for bed. I remember stepping into the bathroom to brush my teeth, and when I came back, the air felt different. I stood in the doorway for a moment, the brush still in my hand, staring at the room. Nothing had changed. The lights were on, the music still played softly, my half-empty plate of pasta sat on the desk. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. It wasn't like I'd heard a noise or seen anything. It was just this presence, like someone was watching me. I told myself I was imagining things. Long day, unfamiliar surroundings, nerves about the training. It could have been anything. But as I climbed into bed and opened a book to settle my mind, the feeling didn't go away. If anything, it got stronger. My eyes kept darting toward the corners of the room, half expecting to catch a shadow moving where it shouldn't be. I ended up leaving the lamp on all night. I only managed a couple of hours of sleep, and even that was restless. Every time I drifted off, I'd wake up suddenly, convinced I'd heard something. A creak from the corner, a faint shuffle near the desk. But whenever I looked, there was nothing there. By morning, the feeling had faded. Daylight streamed through the curtains, and the room looked as ordinary as it had the night before. I brushed off the whole experience, chalking it up to an overactive imagination and a bad night's sleep. After all, the brain plays tricks on you when you're tired, right? But that night, it happened again. The day had gone smoothly, and I'd almost forgotten about the unease I'd felt the night before. But as soon as I walked back into that room after dinner, the same sensation washed over me. It was subtle at first, just the prickling awareness of being watched, but it grew as the evening wore on. By the time I climbed into bed, I was gripping the book in my hands so tightly my knuckles turned white. I wasn't even reading the words anymore. I was just pretending to focus while my ears strained for the slightest sound. And then I heard it. A faint creak, almost imperceptible, coming from the far corner of the room near the closet. My eyes flicked toward the sound, but there was nothing there. The closet door was closed, the light above casting an innocent glow over the area. Still, I couldn't look away. Every instinct screamed at me to keep watching, to not let my guard down. I don't know how long I stared at that corner, but eventually exhaustion took over, and I dozed off with the lamp still on, the book open on my chest. I woke up hours later to the sound of the heating system kicking on, the hum startling me awake. The room was as silent as ever, but the feeling of being watched hadn't gone away. The next morning, I couldn't take it anymore. When I went down to the reception desk, I asked, politely but firmly, if I could be moved to a different room. The woman behind the counter frowned as she tapped away at her computer, finally looking up at me with an apologetic smile. "I'm sorry, but we're fully booked until Friday," she said. "Is there something wrong with your room?" I opened my mouth to explain, but stopped. What could I even say? That I felt like I was being watched? That I was losing sleep because of a presence? It sounded ridiculous. Instead, I just shook my head and forced a smile. "No, it's fine. Just thought I'd ask." The rest of the week dragged on. Every night, the same thing happened. The oppressive sense of being watched, the faint creaks and noises that seemed to come from nowhere. By the third night, I'd stopped turning the radio on or relaxing in the bath. I couldn't enjoy the room anymore. I just wanted to get in and out as quickly as possible. When Friday finally rolled around, I packed my bags faster than I ever have in my life. Story 9. Spiral staircases always creep me out, but I'd never had a real reason for it. I figured it was just one of those irrational fears, a mix of their dizzying height and the way they twist into dark unknowns below. That changed when I visited a hotel during a trip overseas. It wasn't a cheap place either, one of those boutique spots, famous for its architecture and Instagram-worthy interiors. And right at the heart of the building was this enormous, ornate spiral staircase, the kind of staircase people post pictures of with captions like, "Living a fairy tale." I wasn't there for the photos, though. I had checked in the night before, after a long day of traveling, and now, mid-morning, I was heading down to explore the city. As I stepped onto the staircase, it was eerily quiet. Normally, this thing was swarming with people during the day, guests posing for photos, children running up and down. But this morning, barely a soul in sight. It felt strange, but I figured most people were out sightseeing already. The staircase was huge, winding through several floors of the hotel. It had these elegant iron railings and dark wood steps that creaked faintly with every step I took. I was about halfway down, running my hand lightly along the cool metal of the railing, when something caught my eye. On the other side of the staircase, a man was walking up. At first, I didn't think much of it. Plenty of people use the stairs instead of the elevator, right? But as I glanced over again, I couldn't shake the odd feeling he gave me. He was tall, much taller than average, and dressed entirely in black. His face was pale. Too pale. It looked almost chalky, like he'd caked on white powder. His expression was blank, his eyes fixed straight ahead, not on me or anything else. What really unsettled me, though, was the way he moved. His body barely swayed as he ascended, and his head didn't bob like you'd expect when someone's climbing stairs. It was stiff, robotic, like he was gliding more than walking. My immediate thought was that he might be ill, or maybe he was one of those performance artists, pulling some kind of creepy act for attention. Either way, I didn't like it. I picked up my pace, my shoes tapping quickly against the wooden steps, trying to focus on getting to the bottom. But every time I glanced over the railing, he was closer. At first, he'd been a floor or so beneath me, but somehow he was catching up fast, even though his pace hadn't visibly changed. I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up. My chest tightened, and I gripped the railing harder, fighting the urge to break into a full-on run. It didn't make sense. How was he closing the distance so quickly when he was moving so slowly? My logical brain tried to reason it away. It's just the angle of the staircase. He's probably moving faster than it looks. But deep down, logic wasn't winning. When I reached the next landing, I turned sharply, intending to put as much distance between us as possible. That's when I heard it, the faintest sound of footsteps, evenly paced, echoing up the stairwell. They weren't frantic, like someone rushing to catch up. They were steady, deliberate. Each step reverberated in the empty silence, sending a chill down my spine. I risked another glance over my shoulder. He was on the same floor now, just across the staircase from me. Still walking, still looking straight ahead. His face, it was hard to describe. It wasn't blank exactly, but it didn't feel human. There was something about the way his features were arranged, too symmetrical, too smooth, that made him look more like a mannequin than a person. My breathing quickened. I clutched my bag tighter and practically jogged down the next set of stairs, my heart pounding in my chest. I told myself I was being ridiculous. Maybe he was just a guest or a hotel employee on some strange errand. Maybe I was just overtired from all the travel. But every time I tried to shake off the fear, I'd hear the faint echo of his footsteps behind me, and my pulse would spike all over again. By the time I reached the bottom floor, I was gripping the railing so tightly my knuckles were white. I half expected to see him right behind me, but when I glanced back up the staircase, it was empty. Completely empty. The sound of footsteps had stopped, and the man was nowhere to be seen. For a moment I stood there, staring up into the spiraling void above me, trying to make sense of what had just happened. My rational brain told me he must have taken a different hallway, or maybe stepped off on one of the floors I'd passed. But then why had his footsteps stopped so suddenly, and why hadn't I seen him turn off? I shook my head, trying to dismiss the creeping paranoia. It was broad daylight, and the lobby was bustling with people. Nothing could happen here. Still, as I walked out the front doors of the hotel and into the street, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me, like those pale eyes were still fixed on me, even from a distance. Story 10. We were all still buzzing with the excitement of graduation when my high school class decided to take a mountain trip. It wasn't just to celebrate finishing school, but to escape the noise of the city for a bit. We were city kids who spent more time surrounded by concrete than trees, so the idea of a hike through rolling tea plantations and clear mountain air felt like the perfect getaway. We rented a couple of villas for the trip. Cottages, I guess you could call them, though they were bigger than you'd think. 2-story houses, each with 6 bedrooms, perched on a quiet hillside. The girls took the house near the top of the hill, closer to the main road, while the boys were in the house lower down, closer to a sprawling tea plantation. It felt like the perfect setup. We had just enough separation to have our own spaces, but were close enough to meet up and hang out whenever we wanted. The first day passed like a dream. We hiked through the plantation trails, snapped selfies against breathtaking green backdrops, and lounged under towering trees while sharing snacks. By the time we got back to the villas that evening, we were exhausted but happy. I remember thinking how peaceful everything felt. The cool mountain breeze, the sound of insects chirping in the distance. It was the kind of quiet you can only get far away from the city. That peace didn't last. It was well after dark, maybe close to 10 p.m., when we first noticed something was off. A group of us girls had gathered in the living room to play card games and eat the leftover snacks from the hike. The boys' villa down the hill was quiet, which we figured meant they'd either gone to bed early or were too tired to make noise. But then, out of nowhere, we heard shouting. At first it was faint, distant yelling that could have been the boys playing a prank or messing around. But it quickly grew louder, more frantic, the kind of yelling that makes your skin prickle with unease. We paused our game, glancing at each other nervously, when suddenly there was pounding at the front door. Bang, 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 we froze. "Open the door, let us in!" a boy's voice shouted from outside. I didn't recognize it right away. It was panicked, desperate, almost hysterical. Several of us jumped to our feet, and one of the braver girls ran to open the door. What we saw made my blood run cold. A group of boys, at least a dozen of them, stood there, their faces pale and twisted with fear. Their clothes were disheveled, and they were out of breath, like they'd been running up the hill at full speed. One of them, his hands trembling, grabbed the edge of the door frame and gasped, "Something's wrong. Something's really wrong." "What happened?" one of the girls asked, her voice trembling. The boys didn't answer immediately. They just pushed their way inside, practically tripping over each other in their rush to get away from whatever had terrified them. That's when one of them said it, almost whispering, "They're possessed." My stomach dropped. "What do you mean, possessed?" I blurted out, but no one answered me. The boys were talking over each other, their voices a jumble of panic and fear. From what I could piece together, they had been hanging out in their villa when things started to go wrong. At first it was small things, lights flickering, objects falling over without explanation. But then some of the boys started acting strange. They weren't themselves, one of them said, his voice shaking. Their eyes, it's like they weren't even there anymore. Another boy chimed in, his face pale as a ghost. They started screaming and thrashing around like something was trying to come out of them. We tried to help, but it was like they didn't even recognize us. They were laughing, but it wasn't their voices. It was... He broke off, shaking his head, unable to finish. The panic in the room was contagious. My heart was racing, and I could feel my hands starting to shake. One of the older boys, who seemed to be trying to keep it together, stepped forward and said, "We need to keep you girls safe. Don't go down there. Whatever's happening, stay here." We all nodded silently. None of us were about to argue. The rest of the night was chaos. The adults traveling with us had been called, and they arrived at the boys' villa with what I can only describe as spiritual leaders or healers. People who knew how to deal with whatever this was. We weren't allowed to go down there, no matter how curious or worried we were. The healers told us to stay where we were, that it wasn't safe. From the girls' villa, we could hear distant shouting and the sound of furniture being thrown around. Once, there was a blood-curdling scream that made all of us huddle together in fear. One of the girls whispered a prayer under her breath, clutching a small charm she wore around her neck. None of us slept that night. By morning, the healers declared that the situation was handled. We weren't told much, just that the boys who had been affected were resting and would be okay. They looked exhausted, like they'd been through some kind of war. We tried asking them what had happened, but they avoided the questions, brushing us off with forced smiles and vague answers. The trip ended a few days later, but the memory of that night stayed with me. Even now, I can't explain what happened. Maybe it was exhaustion or some kind of shared hysteria, or maybe it really was something else, something that didn't belong in this world. Whatever it was, I'll never forget the look in those boys' eyes when they pounded on our door, begging to be let in. It wasn't just fear, it was pure, unadulterated terror. Thanks for watching. Don't leave before leaving a like to this video. Also hit the subscribe button to support my work. And as always, have a horrific nightmare, my dear.